Imagine a city where Roman legions once marched, where medieval kings plotted their empires, and where modern skyscrapers now pierce the sky. A city that has stood for 2 millennia, burning, rebuilding, conquering, and evolving into a symbol of power, culture, and resilience. That city is London. London's story is not just British history, it's world history. From its ancient beginnings as a Roman settlement called Londinium, to the capital of the largest empire the world has ever seen, and now as a global hub of finance, fashion, politics, and diversity, London is a living chronicle of humanity's triumphs and trials. In this series, we'll journey through every major era in London's evolution, its founding, plagues, fires, revolutions, innovations, wars, and rebirths. We'll uncover the forgotten layers beneath its streets and marvel at how a small riverside outpost became the heartbeat of a modern empire. This is not just a history lesson. This is a deep dive into the DNA of one of the most iconic cities on Earth. Welcome to London's Full History Explained, from Roman Empire to global capital. Let's begin. When most people think of London, they picture red buses, Big Ben, or the modern skyline. But the true beginning of London goes back nearly 2,000 years, to a time when wolves roamed Britain, forests, and the Roman Empire was expanding across the known world. Around AD 43, during the Roman invasion of Britain led by Emperor Claudius, Roman forces advanced inland from the southeastern coast. They sought to establish control over the native Celtic tribes and build a strategic foothold along the River Thames. The location offered a natural crossing point, deep enough for ships and narrow enough for a bridge. It was here that the Romans founded a small commercial settlement, Londinium. Londinium wasn't just a military post. It was designed to be a thriving port and trading center, connecting the Roman province of Britannia to the wider empire. Soon, wooden docks and bridges emerged, linking merchants and goods from distant corners of the empire, grain from Gaul, wine from Italy, and spices from the east. By AD 60, Londinium was growing, but so was resistance. That same year, Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe led a fierce rebellion against Roman rule. Enraged by injustice and brutality, her forces swept through Roman towns. When they reached Londinium, Roman forces made the shocking decision to abandon the city. Boudica's army burned Londinium to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes. But Rome, relentless as always, rebuilt. And not just rebuilt, reinforced. They laid stone foundations, raised walls, and designed a true Roman city, complete with a forum, public baths, amphitheaters, temples, and paved roads. Londinium became the capital of Roman Britain. Archaeological finds under modern London, like the remains of the amphitheater near the Guildhall or the Mithraeum Temple, offer glimpses into this layered past. At its height, Roman Londinium was home to around 60,000 people, a melting pot of Britons, Romans, Gauls, Africans, and traders from across the empire. It had central heating systems, aqueducts, and administrative offices. It was, in many ways, London's first golden age, but like all empires, Rome would eventually falter. By the early 5th century, as Roman power waned and legions withdrew from Britain to defend the crumbling empire elsewhere, Londinium began to decline. The city's population dwindled, its grand buildings fell into disrepair. The once vibrant outpost became a ghost town, echoing with the memories of what once was. Yet something remained. The name, the ruins, the strategic value of the River Thames. It all lingered in the minds of those who came after. Londinium would sleep for a time, but it would rise again. Because cities like London, those born of rivers and empire, never stay silent for long. When the Roman legions departed Britain in the early 5th century, they left behind a crumbling infrastructure, abandoned villas, and empty cities. Londinium was one of them. For nearly 2 centuries it sat largely abandoned, its once grand temples and baths overgrown and crumbling. But the river still flowed, and the land remained fertile. Though silent, Londinium's bones were too important to be forgotten forever. It was during the Anglo-Saxon period, beginning around the 6th century, that life returned to the ruins of the Roman city. Germanic tribes, mainly the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, had begun settling in Britain after the Romans left. Among these new settlers, the Saxons founded a settlement a short distance away from the ruins of Londinium. They called it Lundinwick, London Trading Town. Why not rebuild directly atop Roman Londinium? The answer lies in geography and superstition. The old Roman city had become marshy, its stone ruins difficult to repurpose, and in the minds of the early Anglo-Saxons, the ghost of Roman grandeur seemed too eerie. Instead, they built Lundinwick west of the old city walls, roughly around what we now call Aldwych and the Strand. Lundinwick thrived as a port and market town, trading goods up and down the Thames. Pottery, textiles, and livestock passed through its growing harbor, yet it was still relatively small, a collection of wooden huts compared to Rome's stone majesty. The early Saxons were not builders of empires. They were farmers, warriors, and settlers. But London's strategic value would not go unnoticed for long. By the 9th century, a new threat emerged from the north, the Vikings. These fierce raiders from Scandinavia sailed up the Thames, looting Lundinwick and other English towns with brutal efficiency. In response to the chaos, King Alfred the Great of Wessex, one of England's most remarkable early rulers, took action. Around 886 AD, Alfred decided to reoccupy and fortify the old Roman Londinium, which he renamed Lundenburg, London Fortress. He cleared the ruins, rebuilt the Roman walls, and laid the foundation for what would become the medieval city of London. The decision to reclaim the Roman site marked a turning point. London was once again a walled and defended settlement. Under Alfred and later Anglo-Saxon kings, London became increasingly important. By the 10th century, it was a bustling town with churches, markets, and craftspeople. Though not yet the kingdom's capital, that title belonged to Winchester, London was clearly the commercial heart of England. The city's population grew steadily. Churches like St. Paul's were first founded in this period, and London began to attract merchants from across England and Europe. Streets were laid out, trade guilds were formed, and royal attention turned more frequently toward this dynamic riverside city. By the time King Ethelred the Unready ruled in the late 10th and early 11th centuries, London had already outgrown its post-Roman modesty. It had weathered Viking attacks, plagues, and fires, but it persisted. And then came Canute the Great, a Danish king who seized the English crown in 1016. Despite being a foreign conqueror, Canute embraced London and helped stabilize the kingdom. His rule brought a degree of prosperity, as he recognized London's value as an administrative center. But perhaps the most influential king of this era in terms of London's trajectory was Edward the Confessor. Reigning in the mid-11th century, Edward began constructing one of London's most famous landmarks, Westminster Abbey, just upriver from the old Roman walls. His decision to build here marked the symbolic shift of royal power from Winchester to London. Though Edward died without an heir, setting off the infamous events of 1066, his impact on London's spiritual and political significance was profound. The twin cities of Westminster and the City of London were beginning to take shape, one a royal and religious center, the other a commercial powerhouse. As we approached the Norman conquest, London stood as a city with deep Roman roots, Saxon rebirth, and Viking scars. It was not yet the capital in name, but in influence, it had already become the beating heart of a budding nation. The next chapter in London's story would be shaped by conquest, stone castles, and a crown won on the battlefield. In the year 1066, everything changed, not just for London, but for all of England. The death of Edward the Confessor without a direct heir triggered a fierce struggle for the English crown. three major claimants emerged: Harold Godwinson of England, Harold Hardrada of Norway, and William, Duke of Normandy. The battles that followed would culminate in one of the most pivotal events in British history, the Battle of Hastings. Though Harold was crowned king, his reign lasted only a few months. William invaded from France and defeated Harold's forces at Hastings. With the English king dead and his army shattered, William turned his attention toward London, the political and economic prize of the realm. But Londoners were not quick to surrender. The city's defenders initially resisted William's approach, rallying behind Edgar Atheling, the last surviving member of the royal bloodline. However, recognizing the military might of the Normans, and perhaps understanding the futility of prolonged resistance, the city leaders eventually submitted. In late 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, a symbolic gesture that fused Saxon tradition with Norman dominance. From this moment on, London began to transform, culturally, structurally, and politically. One of William's first actions was to fortify his control over London by building what would become the city's most enduring symbol, the Tower of London. Originally constructed as a wooden fort, it was soon rebuilt in stone, the White Tower, an imposing Norman keep meant to intimidate and control. But the tower was just the beginning. The Normans brought with them a new style of governance, architecture, and urban planning. London's narrow Saxon streets began to give way to stone churches, guild halls, and monasteries. Norman law reshaped the city's administration, though William was wise enough to preserve many Saxon traditions, including the city's unique charters and privileges. He understood that London's wealth came from its independence, and he allowed it to flourish. By the 12th century, London had firmly established itself as England's commercial capital. The population grew, trade boomed, and the Thames bustled with activity. Foreign merchants, especially from Italy and the Hanseatic League, flocked to the city. London Bridge, the only river crossing at the time, became not just a vital link, but a bustling marketplace, lined with houses, shops, and even a chapel. It was during this medieval period that London began to take on its familiar features. The City of London, the square mile enclosed by the ancient Roman wall, functioned as the financial heart, governed by aldermen and a mayor. In 1191, London secured the right to elect its own mayor, a key moment in its rise toward self-governance. Meanwhile, Westminster, with its growing abbey and royal palace, became the seat of English monarchs and government. Thus, the dual identity of London, the crown and the city, was born. Two centers of power, just a few miles apart, but distinct in role and identity. However, London's growth came with peril. In 1135, a massive fire ravaged the city, destroying much of its wooden infrastructure. Though tragic, this fire led to more widespread use of stone in construction, slowly reshaping London's skyline. And while disasters struck, so too did monumental achievements. One such moment came in 1215, when London played a key role in the Magna Carta crisis, as rebellious barons forced King John to sign the historic document at Runnymede. London stood firmly with the reformers. In fact, the city was granted special privileges in the Magna Carta itself, confirming its power and influence. The 13th and 14th centuries saw continued expansion. Great guilds, such as the Worshipful Company of Mercers and Goldsmiths, emerged to control trade and uphold standards. Grand churches like St. Mary Le Bow rose in the skyline, and the first parliamentary gatherings began taking shape in Westminster, sowing the seeds of British democracy. Yet, for all its prosperity, medieval London was no stranger to suffering. In 1348, the Black Death arrived. Carried by ship rats and fleas, the plague tore through London like a specter. It is estimated that between 1/3 and 1/2 of the city's population perished. Entire streets were emptied. Bodies were buried in mass graves. The bells of churches rang out endlessly. But London endured. The survivors adapted. Labor shortages gave peasants more power. Social order began to shift. And as the century closed, London emerged not just as a city of trade and religion, but as a symbol of resilience. The medieval period also left behind a rich cultural legacy. Poets like Geoffrey Chaucer, who worked near the Thames and wrote in the dialect of London, helped shape the English language. Architecture, literature, law, and commerce all evolved in London's shadow. By the dawn of the 15th century, London had become more than just a city. It was the heartbeat of England, a place where power was wielded, wealth was created, and history was written. And in the coming centuries, its heart would beat louder than ever before. As the 15th century gave way to the 16th, a new dynasty rose to power in England, the Tudors, and with them came a dramatic transformation of London, a city that was no longer just a center of trade and tradition, but was now the very heart of political drama, religious upheaval, and cultural rebirth. At the beginning of the Tudor period, London's population stood at around 50,000. By the end of the era, it had more than doubled. The city was rapidly outgrowing its medieval walls, spilling into the surrounding areas, creating bustling suburbs like Southwark, Shoreditch, and Westminster. The skyline was changing, the culture was changing, the power structures were shifting, and at the center of it all stood a king who would forever alter London's future, Henry VIII. When Henry VIII ascended to the throne in 1509, he inherited a city still rooted in medieval customs. But Henry was not a medieval king. He was a force of change. Obsessed with power, legacy, and control, Henry saw London as the stage upon which he would rewrite the rules of monarchy. The most profound transformation came with the English Reformation. Driven by his desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn, Henry broke with the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. This seismic decision reverberated across London. Dozens of monastic institutions, some centuries old, were dissolved. Westminster Abbey, Blackfriars, and Greyfriars saw their lands seized and buildings repurposed or demolished. The Crown sold off much of the former church property, leading to a frenzy of development and private ownership that reshaped the very map of the city. The Tower of London, once primarily a fortress, became a chilling symbol of religious and political suppression. Anne Boleyn was executed there. So were Thomas More and Thomas Cromwell. Under Henry's rule, London's streets ran with both blood and gold. But amid this turmoil, something else was happening, a cultural renaissance. Henry established Whitehall Palace on the banks of the Thames, turning Westminster into a permanent seat of royal power. His daughter, Elizabeth I, would later preside over the Elizabethan Golden Age, a time when London blossomed as a center of literature, exploration, and theater. It was in this era that a young playwright named William Shakespeare began his rise to prominence. In the crowded borough of Southwark, outside the jurisdiction of the City of London's moral authorities, theaters like the Globe, the Rose, and the Curtain sprang up. Audiences of commoners and nobles alike flocked to watch tales of kings, ghosts, love, and betrayal. Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Ben Jonson turned the English language into an art form, and London became the stage on which their words echoed. But this growth and brilliance came at a cost. London in the 16th century was filthy. Streets were narrow. Sewage was dumped into open ditches, and the population density bred disease. Plague outbreaks were frequent and devastating. In 1563, a particularly vicious wave of the plague killed nearly a quarter of the city's inhabitants. Still, the people stayed. Trade flourished. The River Thames teemed with ships. London became a global trading post, connecting England to the markets of the Low Countries, the Mediterranean, and the emerging New World. Merchants grew rich, guilds tightened their hold, the financial district expanded, banks, brokers, and counting houses took root. And with economic growth came political importance. Under the Tudors, especially Elizabeth I, London became the de facto capital of England. While no official decree ever made it so, all major institutions were centered there. Parliament met in Westminster, royal councils convened near Whitehall, and the monarch's court rarely strayed far from the city. The population surged past 200,000 by the end of Elizabeth's reign. The city was bursting at its seams, overflowing with people, ambition, and conflict. Religious tensions simmered beneath the surface. Catholic plots against Elizabeth's life kept the Tower's cells full. The Spanish Armada was met with great fanfare on the Thames. Protestant refugees from Europe found sanctuary in London's alleys and churchyards, bringing with them new ideas, skills, and languages. By the end of the 16th century, London had become one of the most important cities in all of Europe. It was no longer a provincial town on the edge of the continent. It was a vibrant, dangerous, creative, and powerful metropolis, poised for the next stage of transformation. When the Tudors gave way to the Stuarts, they left behind a city divided by class, plagued by disease, bursting with invention, and ready for both greatness and catastrophe. Because what came next would test London like never before. As the 17th century dawned, London was already the largest city in England and among the most influential in Europe. Under the Stuart dynasty, beginning with James I in 1603, the city would reach new heights of cultural and political significance, while enduring some of the most catastrophic events in its history. James I, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, inherited a united throne, becoming the first monarch to rule both England and Scotland as James VI and I. With his ascension came the official name change of England's Union, but more notably for London, came an influx of royal interest and intellectual pursuit. The Jacobean period saw the growth of science, literature, and colonial ambition. Londoners printed books, debated theology, and invested in overseas ventures. The Royal Exchange, founded by Sir Thomas Gresham in the late 1500s, grew into a true center of finance, and the newly established Virginia Company laid the groundwork for British colonization of North America. London became the beating heart of England's global aspirations. But it wasn't just ambition that pulsed through the city, it was also conflict. Religious tensions continued to divide London's population. Though officially Protestant, the city still harbored underground networks of Catholic sympathizers, many of whom were angry and desperate. In 1605, a group of Catholic conspirators plotted to blow up the Houses of Parliament during the state opening, an event we now know as the Gunpowder Plot. The discovery of Guy Fawkes beneath Westminster with barrels of gunpowder shocked the nation. The event only deepened distrust and led to even stricter anti-Catholic laws. As James IV passed the crown to his son, Charles I, tensions between the monarchy and Parliament intensified. Charles's belief in the divine right of kings clashed with a growing sense of parliamentary authority, especially among the politically active elite of London. These disputes erupted into the English Civil War in 1642. London sided largely with Parliament. Its wealth, manpower, and strategic location were vital in the eventual Roundhead victory. Charles the I was tried and executed in 1649, an act that shocked Europe and reshaped English governance forever. For a brief period, London was the capital of a republic under Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth. Though Cromwell ruled with a strict hand, he allowed for some religious tolerance and promoted trade. His rule also saw the rise of England's naval power and the foundation of global trade institutions that would shape London's economic future. When the monarchy was restored in 1660 under Charles II, the city erupted in celebration. The restoration brought back music, theater, and color to a society that had lived under Puritan rule. Playhouses reopened. Fashion flourished. London once again became a hub of social and cultural life. But just as the city began to enjoy peace and pleasure, disaster struck. In 1665, the Great Plague of London swept through the city. Fleas on rats carried the deadly bacterium that infected over 100,000 people, killing a quarter of London's population. Entire neighborhoods were boarded up. Red crosses marked doors. The air reeked of death and despair. The plague revealed the city's vulnerabilities, its lack of sanitation, its overcrowded slums, and its chaotic layout. But worse was still to come. 1 year later, in September 1666, a fire broke out in a bakery on Pudding Lane. Fanned by strong winds and fed by tightly packed wooden buildings, the Great Fire of London raged for 4 days, consuming over 13,000 homes, 87 churches, and many of the city's public buildings. St. Paul's Cathedral, already aging, collapsed in flames. The inferno destroyed most of the medieval city of London. But remarkably, only a handful of lives were lost, perhaps because the fire had followed so closely after the plague, when the population was already thinned and cautious. In the ashes of destruction, London saw opportunity. Sir Christopher Wren, a visionary architect, was tasked with rebuilding the city. His masterpiece would be the new St. Paul's Cathedral, a towering Baroque symbol of London's rebirth. Along with Wren, a wave of designers and urban planners created a cleaner, wider, more modern city, though not without resistance from landowners eager to restore what they had lost. The post-fire era brought insurance companies like Lloyd's of London and fire brigades born out of necessity. London was learning how to protect itself, how to organize, and how to evolve. As the century ended, London had survived plague, fire, and war, and emerged stronger. The founding of the Bank of England in 1694 laid the groundwork for London's eventual dominance in global finance. The Royal Society, supported by monarchs and scientists alike, made London the intellectual capital of Enlightenment thought. And the newly built Houses of Parliament standing over the Thames reflected a maturing sense of democratic identity. By the time the 18th century arrived, London was no longer just a European city. It was on its way to becoming the capital of an empire. As the 18th century unfolded, London entered a new era, one defined by sophistication, science, finance, and imperial ambition. This was the Georgian period, named after a succession of monarchs, George I through George IV, who ruled Britain from 1714 to 1830. During this time, London not only rebuilt itself but reimagined its identity on a global scale. At the dawn of the Georgian era, London was already the largest city in Britain, but now it was fast becoming the largest city in Europe. The population soared past 600,000 and would exceed 1 million by century's end. The city stretched beyond the medieval walls in all directions. New districts emerged: Mayfair, Bloomsbury, Marylebone, and Clerkenwell, each reflecting different social classes, economic roles, and architectural styles. The elegant Georgian townhouses we still admire today began to define the cityscape. Uniform rows of white or brown brick facades, wrought iron balconies, and symmetrical windows reflected Enlightenment values: order, rationality, and restraint. Streets were laid out in grids. Squares like Bedford Square and Grosvenor Square became havens for the elite. But beneath this elegance, London's social inequality was stark. While aristocrats and wealthy merchants wined and dined in their salons, the poor crowded into unsanitary slums, particularly in the East End. Children worked in factories. Crime was rampant. The city's underworld flourished in alleys and gin shops, while debtors' prisons and public executions served as grim reminders of society's harsh justice. Yet, the intellectual vibrancy of Georgian London was unmatched. The city became the epicenter of the Enlightenment in Britain. The founding of the Royal Society brought together scientists and thinkers like Isaac Newton, Edmund Halley, and later Joseph Priestley. Coffee houses, often called penny universities, buzzed with debate about science, politics, and economics. Figures like Samuel Johnson, David Hume and Adam Smith were frequent presences in the city's intellectual salons. Meanwhile, publishing flourished. London was the literary heart of the English-speaking world. Newspapers, periodicals, pamphlets, and novels reached a growing literate public. The works of Daniel Defoe, Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, and later Jane Austen passed through the presses of Fleet Street. Culturally, the city boomed. Theaters like Drury Lane and Covent Garden filled nightly. Painters such as William Hogarth captured both the glamour and the filth of London life. Museums and galleries were established, including the founding of the British Museum in 1753, symbolizing the age's hunger for knowledge and collection. All of this happened against the backdrop of empire. The British Empire was expanding rapidly, and London stood at its center. The city became the command post for colonial administration, international trade, and maritime exploration. The East India Company, headquartered in the city, governed vast territories across Asia. Exotic goods, tea, spices, silks, sugar, flooded London's markets. The wealth of empire flowed in, enriching the merchant classes and fueling new industries. But this prosperity had a dark side, one that history would not forget. London was deeply complicit in the transatlantic slave trade. Though slavery was never legal on English soil, London-based ships, merchants, and banks financed, insured, and profited from the enslavement of millions. Human lives were commodified, and the city's wealth was built in part on their suffering. The docklands of the Thames were filled with cargo, some human, some harvested through inhuman means. By the late 18th century, abolitionist movements began to grow. Figures like Olaudah Equiano, a formerly enslaved man, and William Wilberforce led the charge, with London as their stage. Speeches were delivered in town halls, petitions signed in churches, and awareness raised through pamphlets and art. London became a center of both complicity and reform. Meanwhile, political unrest echoed across Europe. The American Revolution, fueled in part by policies made in London, was a blow to British prestige. But the French Revolution, with its executions and populist fervor, frightened the English elite. London responded with caution, cracking down on radical voices while expanding its police and surveillance networks. Domestically, the Industrial Revolution had begun. Though its early epicenters were in northern cities like Manchester and Birmingham, its impacts were deeply felt in London. Coal smoke darkened the skies. New canals and turnpikes connected the capital to the nation's resources. Factories edged into the suburbs, changing the rhythm of life and labor. Public infrastructure also improved. In 1750, Westminster Bridge was completed, providing a crucial new crossing over the Thames. Street lighting, rudimentary sanitation, and the early concepts of public health began to take root. The city was beginning to modernize, slowly, unevenly, but visibly. By the end of the Georgian era, London was a paradox, a city of profound elegance and brutal poverty, of scientific enlightenment and imperial exploitation, of cultured elites and desperate slums. It was a city in motion, stretching outward, upward, and beyond Britain's borders. The 19th century loomed, and with it would come the Victorian Age, a time when London would become not just the capital of an empire, but the center of the world. If the Georgian era laid the foundation, then the Victorian era built the empire. During the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901, London exploded in size, complexity, and influence. It became the beating heart of the largest empire the world had ever known, a global capital of industry, innovation, politics, and paradox. By 1851, London's population had surged past 2 million, making it the largest city on Earth. It was a metropolis of boundless ambition and unfathomable contrasts. Towering banks and palatial mansions rose beside soot-covered factories and disease-ridden slums. The River Thames, once the city's lifeblood, had turned into a foul-smelling sewer. But the Victorians were nothing if not ambitious. The era began with a sense of destiny. With the Industrial Revolution in full force, London became a symbol of modernity. Trains now connected it to every corner of the country. Factories pumped out goods at unprecedented speed. And in 1851, the city hosted the Great Exhibition in the Crystal Palace, a massive glass structure built in Hyde Park to showcase the marvels of science, engineering, and imperial conquest. The exhibition was a declaration. London was not just a city, it was the showroom of human progress. Beneath that gleaming surface, however, lay a much darker truth. The city's growth had outpaced its infrastructure. Working-class districts like Whitechapel, Lambeth, and Southwark were overcrowded, under-policed, and unsanitary. Cholera outbreaks were frequent. Raw sewage flowed through the streets and into the Thames. In 1858, the stench from the river became so unbearable that Parliament itself was nearly evacuated, a crisis known as the Great Stink. It was a wake-up call. Parliament finally funded an ambitious sewer system under the guidance of engineer Joseph Bazalgette. Over the next decade, tunnels were dug, embankments were raised, and the tide of filth was, for a time, turned back. London was modernizing, but only for some. The stark contrast between wealth and poverty became one of the era's defining features. On one side, you had the aristocracy enjoying dinner parties in Belgravia and Kensington, their gas-lit parlors adorned with chandeliers and velvet drapes. On the other, you had families of 10 crammed into single-room tenements in Spitalfields, scraping by on factory wages or begging in the streets. This contrast captured the imagination of writers and reformers alike. Charles Dickens, perhaps London's greatest chronicler, painted vivid pictures of the city's injustice in works like Oliver Twist, Bleak House, and A Christmas Carol. His stories gave voice to the voiceless and shone a light on the grime behind the grandeur. Crime and mystery also filled the London fog. The 1880s saw the terrifying rise of Jack the Ripper, whose gruesome murders in Whitechapel shocked the nation and remain unsolved to this day. The case exposed both the failings of the police and the desperate conditions of the East End. It also marked the birth of modern tabloid journalism, with London newspapers feeding the public's morbid curiosity with lurid headlines and speculation. Yet, despite the shadows, this was also a golden age for public works. The London Underground, the world's first subway system, opened in 1863. It revolutionized transport and helped alleviate surface congestion. Iconic stations, tunnels, and steam-powered trains connected neighborhoods like never before. Public institutions flourished. The Victoria and Albert Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the British Library opened their doors to the public. Education reforms expanded literacy, and scientific breakthroughs in medicine, chemistry, and biology poured out from London's universities and research institutions. The British Empire, meanwhile, reached its zenith, and London was its capital. Goods from every corner of the world flowed into the port of London. Tea from India, cotton from Egypt, gold from South Africa, spices from Ceylon. Colonial administrators governed far-off lands from offices in Whitehall. Missionaries, soldiers, and businessmen came and went, expanding British influence under the Union Jack. Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897 brought millions to the streets in celebration of an empire upon which the sun never set. London was proud, powerful, and in many eyes untouchable. But beneath the surface, tremors were forming. Workers began to demand better conditions. The labor movement gained traction. Suffragettes marched for women's rights, chaining themselves to railings and risking arrest for the vote. Immigrant communities from Ireland, Eastern Europe, and the colonies added complexity to London's identity, challenging notions of Britishness. The city was evolving, faster, denser, and more defiant than ever before. As the 20th century approached, Victorian London stood at a crossroads. It was still a city of empire and industry, of palaces and prisons, of foggy streets and gleaming domes. But change was coming. And soon, London would face challenges more devastating than any plague or fire. A new century and a new war loomed on the horizon. The 20th century arrived like a whirlwind, and for London, it would be a century defined by both devastation and defiance. No longer merely the jewel of an empire, London would now have to endure 2 world wars, waves of migration, and profound cultural transformation. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 shocked the world, and though much of the fighting occurred on the European mainland, London was not untouched. Zeppelins, massive German airships, floated across the night sky, dropping bombs over East London in the first air raids the city had ever seen. For the first time in its long history, Londoners had to look up in fear. Over the course of the war, thousands of men left London to fight in France and Flanders. Entire communities mourned the loss of a generation. The cenotaph, erected in Whitehall, became the nation's central site of remembrance. The city was scarred, but it was not broken. After the war, London faced a new kind of struggle: how to modernize in a world forever changed. The 1920s and 30s brought a mix of hope and hardship. The underground network expanded with sleek new trains and Art Deco stations. The BBC began broadcasting from London, introducing radio to the masses. Jazz filled the dance halls. Women gained the vote. Yet economic inequality persisted, and the Great Depression hit hard, especially in the East End. And then came 1939. Another war, a greater threat. World War II brought destruction on a scale London had never seen. In 1940, following the fall of France, Adolf Hitler turned his attention to Britain. What followed was 8 months of sustained aerial bombardment, the Blitz. Night after night, bombs rained down on the city. The skyline was set ablaze. Landmarks like the Houses of Parliament, St. Paul's Cathedral, and Buckingham Palace were all hit. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Over 30,000 Londoners were killed. Fires roared, buildings collapsed, families huddled in the tunnels of the London Underground, turning train platforms into bomb shelters. And yet, the city never surrendered. Images of St. Paul's Cathedral, standing tall amid smoke and ruin, became symbols of resilience. Winston Churchill, addressing the nation from a secure war room in Westminster, called on Londoners to hold firm. "We shall never surrender." They didn't. London's resistance wasn't just military, it was cultural. Theaters reopened, music played. Children were evacuated, but schools continued. Firefighters, ambulance crews, and volunteers, many of them women, formed the backbone of the home front. The Battle of Britain was won in the skies above the city, and by 1945, with the fall of Berlin, peace returned. But victory came at a heavy cost. The London of 1945 was a city in ruins. Nearly 100,000 buildings were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Homelessness soared. Infrastructure was crippled. The government faced a new kind of war, the war of reconstruction. But with challenge came transformation. In 1948, London hosted the Summer Olympics, dubbed the Austerity Games, as a symbol of recovery and hope. That same year, the National Health Service was founded, giving every citizen access to free health care, a monumental change birthed in the aftermath of war. It was also the year that the Empire Windrush docked in London, carrying hundreds of Caribbean migrants who would change the city forever. These individuals, answering Britain's call for workers, settled largely in areas like Brixton, Paddington, and Notting Hill, enriching London's culture, music, and language. The post-war decades brought rapid modernization. Tower blocks replaced bombed-out streets. New towns and housing estates spread outward. The London Green Belt was established to prevent urban sprawl. The city's face was changing, both physically and socially. Immigration from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Africa followed, further diversifying the population. London became a cosmopolitan capital, but not without tension. The 1958 Notting Hill race riots, police discrimination, and economic disparity laid bare the city's growing pains. Yet from this conflict rose resilience and creativity. In the decades to come, carnival, reggae, punk, and hip-hop would all echo through London's streets. By the 1960s, the world once again turned its eyes to London, not for war, but for culture. The swinging 60s saw London at the forefront of music, fashion, and rebellion. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and The Who emerged from smoky clubs and recording studios. Miniskirts, mod culture, and radical politics made London the cool capital of the world. But the memories of war were never far away. Memorials dotted the city. War-torn buildings remained standing until the late 20th century. Generations passed down stories of shelters, sirens, and survival. And with each passing year, London rebuilt, not only its infrastructure, but its identity. By the time Queen Elizabeth II marked her Silver Jubilee in 1977, London had reclaimed its place as a world city, resilient, radiant, and remarkably diverse. The century had tested the capital in every way imaginable. It had survived bombs and blackouts, riots and reconstruction, and through it all, it remained what it had always been, a city that endures. As the dust of the Second World War settled and Britain's empire receded, London was forced to reinvent itself. The mid-20th century ushered in an era of profound transformation, economically, politically, and culturally. The British Empire had begun to dissolve, but London, ever resilient, turned its gaze inward and forward, preparing to rise again as a modern metropolis. In the 1950s and 60s, the focus was reconstruction. Bombed-out buildings were replaced with bold new designs. Brutalist architecture, concrete, angular, and unapologetic, emerged in housing estates, civic buildings, and cultural venues. The South Bank, once a neglected stretch of riverbank, was reimagined as a cultural quarter with institutions like the Royal Festival Hall and National Theatre. But it wasn't just buildings that were changing, so too was the population. The arrival of Commonwealth citizens from the Caribbean, South Asia, Africa, and elsewhere redefined London's identity. Neighborhoods like Brixton, Southall, Whitechapel, and Tooting became vibrant cultural hubs. With them came new languages, foods, faiths, and traditions. London was no longer just British, it was unmistakably global. This diversity brought friction, but also strength. The Notting Hill Carnival, born from Afro-Caribbean culture, grew into Europe's largest street festival. New mosques, temples, and gurdwaras were built. London's very essence was being rewritten by the people who now called it home. Economically, the picture was more complex. The decline of manufacturing in the 1970s hit London hard. Unemployment rose, especially in working-class areas. Deindustrialization left scars, and the winter of discontent in 1978-79 saw strikes and public dissatisfaction reach boiling point. Politically, London was undergoing change, too. The Greater London Council, GLC, formed in the 1960s to coordinate citywide planning, became a battleground between progressive local policies and central government. Under Ken Livingstone, the GLC promoted public transport, anti-racism campaigns, and urban equality. But in 1986, Margaret Thatcher's government abolished it, citing overspending and politicization. Despite the turbulence, London's creative energy never waned. The 1980s saw the rise of British punk, new wave, and post-punk, with clubs like the Roxy, Camden Palace, and Heaven becoming centers of youth rebellion. Art scenes blossomed in Shoreditch and Soho. Designers like Vivienne Westwood and musicians like David Bowie made London a style capital. The city remained edgy, unpredictable, and alive. Economically, salvation came from an unexpected place: finance. In 1986, the Big Bang deregulated the London Stock Exchange, transforming the City of London into a high-speed, high-stakes financial powerhouse. Skyscrapers began to rise again, not as places of prayer or government, but of banking and capital. Canary Wharf, a former dockyard, was redeveloped into a glass and steel financial district. London's economy roared back to life. The 1990s were a time of cultural confidence. Under Tony Blair's new Labour government, London was rebranded as Cool Britannia. Britpop bands like Oasis and Blur, artists like Damien Hirst, and filmmakers like Guy Ritchie exported a gritty, stylish vision of the capital. London was no longer just the seat of monarchy and finance. It was the epicenter of creativity. And then in 1997, something historic happened. London got its own mayor. After decades without a central governing body, Ken Livingstone, the same leader from the GLC era, was elected as the city's first mayor of London. His focus was on public transport, inclusivity, and reclaiming the river. A new era of local accountability had begun. By the turn of the millennium, London had reasserted itself as a global capital in a world no longer defined by empires but by networks, diversity, and digital connectivity. In the year 2000, the Millennium Dome, later the O2 Arena, opened on the Greenwich Peninsula, a symbol of ambition if not universal acclaim. The London Eye, rotating above the Thames, gave a new panoramic view of the ancient city. The Jubilee Line extension and sleek modern tube stations showcased a transport network looking ahead. And yet, for all its reinvention, London had not forgotten its past. Its ancient structures still stood. Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, the Tower of London, witnesses to every monarch, every war, every transformation. Its streets still echoed with stories. Dickensian alleyways, blitz-scarred walls, post-war council estates. And its spirit, resilient, restless, and always reaching forward, was very much alive. By the early 2000s, London had emerged from the shadows of war and decline. It was cosmopolitan, confident, and connected. A city that had once ruled the world now opened its arms to it. But a new century brings new trials. And in the years ahead, London would once again find itself tested, not by fire or plague, but by terror, technology, and the test of unity. As the 21st century unfolded, London stood tall, revitalized, multicultural, and confidently global. But with the opportunities of a new age came fresh challenges. The early 2000s would test London in ways that were both shocking and transformative, reshaping the city's identity yet again. In the wake of the September 11th attacks in the United States, the global conversation shifted. London, as a key Western capital, tightened its security. Immigration policies were reviewed. Intelligence operations expanded. But no one could predict how deeply terrorism would impact the city. On July 7, 2005, that impact became horrifyingly real. 4 suicide bombers detonated explosives on the London Underground and a double-decker bus during the morning rush hour. The 7/7 bombings, as they came to be known, killed 52 people and injured hundreds more. It was the city's worst peacetime attack since World War II. In the aftermath, London grieved, but it also stood defiant. Just one day after the attacks, the tube reopened. Londoners, though shaken, refused to be broken. Tributes poured in from around the world. The attacks highlighted not only the fragility of peace, but also the resilience that had defined the city for centuries. This tragic moment also forced a reckoning with extremism, surveillance, and community relations. Tensions surfaced. Islamophobic incidents rose, but so did grassroots efforts to bridge divides. Interfaith groups, youth outreach programs, and community leaders worked tirelessly to strengthen the social fabric. Meanwhile, another kind of revolution was sweeping through the city: technology. The rise of the internet, smartphones, and digital commerce fundamentally changed how Londoners lived, worked, and moved. Startups flourished in East London's Tech City, an area once dominated by warehouses and garment factories that now became home to app developers, fintech firms, and AI labs. London's financial services modernized too, from the towers of Canary Wharf to the algorithm-driven offices in the Square Mile. Data replaced paperwork, and finance became faster and more global than ever. The 2008 global financial crisis hit hard, but London once again bounced back. Government intervention stabilized key institutions. The Bank of England took center stage. Though austerity followed, the city's core industries remained intact. Culturally, London stayed bold. The 2012 Olympic Games hosted in Stratford were a triumph, not just in sport but in urban regeneration. The East End, long neglected, was reborn with new housing, parks, transit links, and the iconic Olympic Stadium. The opening ceremony, directed by Danny Boyle, celebrated everything from Shakespeare to the NHS and proudly showcased Britain's diversity and creativity. For 2 shining weeks, London was once again at the center of the world, and this time, not for conquest or catastrophe, but for celebration. Yet beneath the Olympic glow, real challenges persisted. Housing affordability became a crisis. London property prices soared, driven by international investment, population growth, and limited housing supply. Many Londoners, especially young people, found themselves priced out of their own neighborhoods. The term generation rent entered the public lexicon. Transport infrastructure, while impressive, was stretched. Overcrowding, aging tube lines, and rising costs strained daily life. Projects like Crossrail, later branded the Elizabeth Line, promised relief, but delays and budget overruns became the norm. And yet, despite all this, London remained one of the most livable and desirable cities in the world. It became home to a diverse population of over 8 million, with more than 300 languages spoken. Boroughs like Hackney, Camden, Hounslow, and Croydon each developed unique identities, united under a broader London banner. Sadiq Khan, elected mayor in 2016, became the first Muslim to hold the office, reflecting both the city's diversity and the electorate's evolving values. His tenure focused on transport, housing, and unity in the face of rising populism and division. But 2016 brought another seismic event, Brexit. The United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. London, notably, voted overwhelmingly to remain. The decision exposed deep divides between the capital and other parts of the country. For London, the implications were vast. Changes to immigration, finance, trade, and its role on the global stage. Businesses braced for uncertainty. EU nationals who had built lives in London questioned their future. Yet even as the Brexit transition dragged on, London's economy proved adaptable, and the city continued to attract talent, capital, and creativity. And then, just as the Brexit fog began to lift, the world was struck by a new crisis, COVID-19. In 2020, the coronavirus pandemic brought London to a halt. Streets fell silent. The tube emptied. Landmarks closed. Theaters went dark. Hospitals filled. Over 19,000 people in London would lose their lives to the virus. But even in isolation, Londoners found ways to connect. Clap for carers rang out across balconies. Volunteers delivered groceries to the vulnerable. Local shops pivoted online. Zoom replaced boardrooms, and virtual museums kept culture alive. The crisis revealed both London's vulnerabilities, unequal access to healthcare, fragile housing systems, and its strength. Recovery was uneven, but the spirit of the city endured. By 2022 and beyond, London was learning to live with the virus. Tourism slowly returned, offices reopened, albeit with hybrid models, and the city began asking big questions about its future. How would it tackle climate change? Who was it really for? And what kind of London did people want to build next? A city that once expanded by ship and steam now moved with data and drone. From the Roman Bridge to smart motorways, from plague doctors to digital health apps, London had come farther than anyone could have imagined. But its journey wasn't over. Because London, always in motion, was already on its way to becoming something else, again. As the third decade of the 21st century unfolds, London stands not just as a monument to its past, but as a living laboratory for the future. With a population of over 9 million and a global reputation for culture, finance, and diversity, London today is facing a new set of priorities: climate resilience, technological integration, social equity, and sustainable growth. At the heart of modern London is a question: how does an ancient city prepare itself for a future it cannot yet see? One major answer lies in green infrastructure. London has declared a climate emergency and committed to becoming a net-zero city by 2030. To reach this goal, urban planners, businesses, and communities are rethinking how the city breathes, moves, and consumes. From rewilding old railways into parks to converting car-heavy roads into cycle lanes, green living is now an essential part of London's transformation. Projects like the London Green Grid are stitching together green spaces across boroughs, creating corridors for wildlife and clean air. New initiatives such as low-traffic neighborhoods, LTNs, ultra-low-emission zones, ULEZ, and electric bus fleets are reshaping how people navigate the capital, reducing carbon emissions while encouraging walking, cycling, and public transport. The Thames itself is being reimagined, not just as a historic artery, but as a source of renewable energy, a tool for flood defense, and a cleaner ecosystem. The Thames Tideway Tunnel, dubbed the Super Sewer, aims to intercept raw sewage overflow and protect the river for generations to come. At the same time, London is embracing the digital revolution in unprecedented ways. The city has become a leading hub for fintech, AI, cybersecurity, and green tech. Startups in Shoreditch, King's Cross, and Canary Wharf are developing technologies that touch everything from financial markets to mental health apps. London's reputation as a place where old industries meet new ideas has never been more valid. Smart technologies are now embedded in the city's fabric. Traffic is monitored in real time. Street lighting adjusts to footfall. Waste management is data-driven. The London Underground, once powered by coal-fired engines, now runs on algorithms that optimize scheduling, energy use, and predictive maintenance. 5G networks are enabling immersive experiences in museums, AR city tours for tourists, and telehealth services that reach into the most isolated flats of the city's public housing blocks. But technology alone does not define the future. Equity does. London is acutely aware of its inequalities, of wealth gaps between boroughs, of access to quality housing, healthcare, and education. Post-COVID economic recovery and Brexit fallout exposed the fragile threads holding many communities together. Rising housing costs continue to price people out of their neighborhoods. Gentrification, though economically vibrant, brings displacement. In response, London is turning toward community-focused regeneration. Social housing developments now integrate sustainability, communal spaces, and cultural facilities. Public libraries, youth centers, and makerspaces are being revived not as relics, but as engines of opportunity. Education, too, is changing. Schools across London have adopted digital learning platforms, and partnerships with tech companies have brought coding, robotics, and creative technologies into classrooms. In areas once left behind, a new generation is growing up digitally fluent, socially aware, and globally connected. And through it all, London's diversity remains its greatest strength. Today, more than a third of Londoners were born outside the UK. The city hosts Europe's largest Chinese New Year celebrations, West Indian Carnival, Diwali in Trafalgar Square, Eid festivals in East London, and Pride in Soho, all in one calendar year. Religious tolerance, cultural expression, and linguistic variety form the daily rhythm of the capital. Walk down any street in Southall, New Cross, or Stoke Newington, and you'll hear multiple languages, taste global cuisines, and see identities woven into every shop window and mural. London's artistic scene continues to push boundaries. Institutions like Tate Modern, the Barbican, and the National Theatre share space with underground venues, digital exhibitions, and street performance collectives. Graffiti speaks as loudly as gallery art. TikTok creators and spoken-word poets share the same air as West End actors and classical composers. Politically, London often stands apart, progressive in vision, internationalist in tone, and unafraid to speak for inclusion, green policy, and global collaboration. The mayor's office has prioritized affordable housing, climate action, and digital transformation. Cross-party coalitions are forming to address urban poverty and tech ethics simultaneously. And yet, for all its high-speed ambition, London still protects its past. Roman walls remain embedded in basements. The Tower of London still casts a medieval shadow on the Thames. The Shard, London's tallest skyscraper, rises just steps from where Shakespeare's Globe once stood. It's this interplay between ancient and modern that gives London its unique pulse. The Elizabeth Line, finally opened in 2022, connects the East and West with sleek precision. Heathrow, Gatwick, and City Airport maintain London's role as a global gateway. And the city's future, despite headwinds, seems wide open. Because London is not done yet, not by far. It has been many things: Roman outpost, Saxon trading town, medieval fortress, imperial capital, bombed ruin, digital titan. But perhaps its most powerful identity is this: London is a city that learns. It learns from fire and flood, from war and migration, from collapse and creativity. And every time, it rises, not by erasing its history, but by building upon it. As we move deeper into the 21st century, one thing remains certain. London isn't just surviving the future, it's writing it. After 2,000 years of rise, ruin, and rebirth, London today stands as more than a collection of buildings or boroughs. It is an idea, a living narrative of resilience, contradiction, and possibility. A city shaped by countless hands, voices, invasions, and visions. As it moves forward into an unpredictable future, London also wrestles with what it means to be London. That question is both historical and deeply human. Walk through the streets of Westminster, and you're surrounded by symbols of monarchy, parliament, and empire. But just a few miles east, in Tower Hamlets, you'll hear Bengali spoken on street corners, find Islamic architecture beside Victorian factories, and see markets filled with spices, textiles, and life. London isn't one city. It's many cities layered atop one another, existing simultaneously. Its legacy is global. The English language, refined in London, is now spoken by over 1.5 billion people. Its financial system, centered in the city, continues to influence global markets. Its legal principles, rooted in Magna Carta and common law, echo in courtrooms across continents. And its pop culture, from the Beatles to Harry Potter, James Bond to grime music, resonates with generations worldwide. But legacies are not always comfortable. London was also the nerve center of the British Empire, an empire built on colonization, slavery, and exploitation. Statues in Trafalgar Square, street names in Kensington, and museum collections from around the world tell stories of both glory and grievance. In recent years, London has begun to reckon with this past. Movements like Black Lives Matter, debates over monuments, and demands for colonial restitution have ignited dialogue. Institutions like the British Museum and the National Gallery are re-examining their roles. Education is evolving to include the stories of those who were previously excluded from the official version of London's history. This introspection is not a weakness, it is a sign of maturity. For London's power has always come not from perfection, but from its willingness to evolve. In its very DNA, London is built to change. Look at its skyline, a jagged interplay of eras. The medieval dome of St. Paul's, the neo-Gothic spires of Big Ben, the modernist sweep of the Gherkin, the crystalline tip of the Shard. The city isn't afraid to juxtapose. It thrives on contrast. That tension between old and new is where London's creativity lives. Its transport system mirrors this too. You can step out of a driverless Elizabeth Line train and in 5 minutes be on a double-decker Routemaster bus, designs separated by a century. You can take a ride on the Emirates airline cable car, then descend into the deepest tube tunnel in the world. Every journey in London is layered with time, and the people, oh, the people, are the city's heartbeat. Londoners are not a single group. They are artists and accountants, refugees and royalty, builders and baristas, students and scientists. They are the stories of immigration, survival, invention, and celebration. Whether born in Lambeth or Lagos, Peckham or Poland, the people who make London are the very essence of its strength. From every corner of the globe, people come not to see a fixed idea, but to add to it. There is no one London identity, and that's precisely why it works. The city embraces dualities. It is at once formal and rebellious, polished and punk, ancient and futuristic. It can host royal processions in the morning and underground raves at night. It contains temples and pubs, mosques and clubs, opera houses and skate parks, and it persists, not by resisting change, but by dancing with it. As climate crises loom, London pushes for urban sustainability. As digital revolutions accelerate, it adapts with smart policies and open data. As political landscapes shift, the city remains a voice for democracy, diversity, and inclusion. It doesn't always get it right. The challenges are real: inequality, housing, transit stress, social tension. But what sets London apart is not that it avoids hardship, it's that it grows through it. In many ways, the future of London depends not on its monuments or tech, but on something far more powerful: imagination. The imagination of a young coder in Hackney, the vision of an architect rethinking public space, the dreams of a first-generation student boarding a red bus toward opportunity. The stories shared between neighbors in dozens of languages, all saying, "This is our city." Because in the end, London is a story still being written, by people who believe that history is not a weight to carry, but a platform to build from. A city that burned and rose, that fell and fought, that ruled and listened, that endured, adapted, and endured again. So what is London? London is the world in one city. It is contradiction and coherence. It is memory and movement. It is past, present, and promise, all living in the same moment. And it will always be one thing above all else. And so, we reach the end of our journey, a journey that has spanned more than 2,000 years, countless lives, and one city that defies every attempt to contain it: London. From the marshy banks of the Thames, where Roman soldiers first staked out Londinium, to the bustling, data-driven, multicultural metropolis of today, London has never been still. It has been razed by fire, ravaged by plague, shattered by bombs, and torn by tension. And every single time, it has rebuilt, not the same as before, but stronger, more complex, and more alive. We've walked with Boudica as she rose in rebellion. We've stood inside Roman walls, heard the hammers of Saxon builders, and crossed the drawbridge of the Norman Tower of London. We've watched kings and queens be crowned at Westminster Abbey, and poets shape the English language in Elizabethan theaters. We've seen London burn in 1666, rise in stone, explode in population during the Georgian and Victorian ages, and mourn its dead as the bombs of the Blitz fell from the sky. We've felt the rhythm of protest, the beat of cultural revolution, the shifting pulse of power, from the fading British Empire to the global influence of finance, fashion, music, and innovation. And we've seen London wrestle with itself, with inequality, with identity, with memory. Because no city in the world holds such vast history in its bones, while dreaming so vividly of what it can become. London is not a museum. It is not a relic. It is a living archive of human ambition. It contains within it every contradiction: grit and glamour, royalty and rebellion, structure and spontaneity. And it thrives precisely because it refuses to be any one thing. So wherever you are in the world, if you've walked these streets, even for a day, you've felt it. That sense of grandeur and grit, of past and promise, of being just one thread in a centuries-old tapestry. Because London isn't just a city, it's a story. And that story is still being written by you, by me, by everyone who dares to dream inside its ever-evolving heart. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the soul of London.